At the end of this last year, some family friends here in Tucson threw an impromptu celebration. And like so many other families, my own had plans just to stay at home and quietly toast the new year. But like those other families, we instantly abandoned those plans to join in a celebration, a family and of friends, of good food and drink, and a question. What will you do in 2016? Our friends had decorated a bulletin board with just this question, and after we arrived, I helped my two youngest sons write their answers. Some of you may know that I have 5 sons. Yeah, not a mistake. Not a mistake at all. Just thought I'd mention that. But Robin, who is 7, he thought about it for just a moment and he said, hug. And Magnus, who is 4, is just a little older than the twins. A little younger than the twins. He chose play. Although they may have only said that because it's exactly what they wanted to do in the moment. And it's exactly what they did right after that. They just ran off and started hugging and playing. But it took me longer to come up with my answer. What would I do in 2016? And it took, a good hour before I finally settled on something that I thought was worthy of a new year. Take more risks. Make more mistakes. Ours is a faith tradition that welcomes mistakes. It's not that I can find any of our forebears saying outright, mistakes are welcome. Rather, it's implicit in the view of human nature that is at the core of our religious tradition. It was the Reverend Thomas Starr King, 1824 to 1864, who bridged the then separate Unitarian and Universalist faiths, who famously said, "The Universalist thinks God is too good to damn them forever, and the Unitarian thinks they are too good to be damned." Liberal Christians at the time, Universalists, believed that Jesus' sacrifice on the cross saved us all from sin. And Unitarians believed that human beings were created in the image of God as both good and rational, traits that countered the deeply disparaging theologies of Calvinism, for example. Calvinism that taught human beings suffered from total depravity, meaning no matter how good a person acted, their nature was spoiled by sin and could not be redeemed except for God's grace. Both Universalists and Unitarians, of course, were addressing what was considered the biggest mistake in the Western religious traditions, the fall, or as it became known in the early Christian church, the doctrine of original sin. It's that story of Eden. First man, told not to eat from the tree of good or evil, told not to eat from the tree of immortality, given companions in a beautiful world, facing temptation, following it through to its end by eating of the knowledge of good and evil, and eventually having to deal with all of the consequences. Early church knew this as a rebellion against God, God's will. But there are other ways to interpret that story, other ways to read the very same words and come up with a totally different conclusion. I've often wondered, why is it that God, who could do anything in this story, create a beautiful world, create human beings and all the plants and animals in it, put 2 trees that look delicious within reach of all of those beings? Seems a little like a setup to me. And then I begin to wonder, well, what if we had stayed in paradise? What if we hadn't ever had the tree of knowledge of the tree of immortality? What if we had just stayed there without temptation? I mean, a literalist interpretation would be very boring. We would simply have two human beings living in paradise for all time. See, the world begins because they rebelled against what they were told, or in another interpretation, they made a mistake that they had to make in order to grow up. I call this the doctrine of adolescence. And I have to say, I lived it out. And as a father, I have watched so many of my children live it out. And as a minister for our Unitarian Universalist Association, I see that our faith lives it out. Oh, we believe in rebelling. We believe in challenging authority, almost to a fault sometimes. But it's because we believe something very different about human nature itself. We do not believe that human nature is innately sinful. We don't believe that we suffer for the mistake of original people. What we believe instead is that mistakes are a part of our human condition. Joseph Campbell, a wonderful scholar of world mythology and interpreter for all of us, he once said, "You get a totally different civilization, a totally different way of living, according to your myth, as to whether nature is fallen or whether nature itself is a manifestation of divinity. And the Spirit being the revelation of divinity that's inherent in nature." What if rebellion simply means growing up? What if our mistakes, all of our mistakes, make us who we are? And what if our nature means, or it is, an access to the deeper spiritual life? Our faith tradition believes in the inherent worth and dignity of every person. We don't believe, however, in a perfection of each person, although it may sound like it sometimes. We believe rather that we are not inherently flawed, but rather there are times that we are mistaken. And I know that's challenging. I know there are times we look at the world around us and we see so many human-caused disasters. We see so many humans causing disasters. Now, politicians are the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. It's much more challenging for us to look at those we know, those we love, and see them not as flawed, but simply mistaken. And if we look at others and we judge them, then that's a mistake of a sort also. Because if we truly believe as Unitarian Universalists that mistakes are simply a part of who we are, if our inherent worth and dignity encompasses them, then that means I am allowed to make mistakes, and so are you. Challenge that we live is not just to look at the mistakes of others, but to look at our own mistakes as a part of our being, a part of our becoming. And that challenge is the legacy of our Unitarian Universalist forebears, but I like it best the way that Katie said it at a gathering, you may not remember this, of ministers and spouses sometime last year. She said, "When you practice our religion right, it's really hard. When you practice our religion right, it's really hard. Because if you believe that human beings are inherently worthy and dignified, if you believe that mistakes are simply a part of who we are, then it's not really about forgiveness. It's not about grace of God. It's about becoming. It's about our growing up and growing out, not as just human beings, but as unique and beautiful individuals who make mistakes. At the beginning of this month, this is the sermon I offered my congregation. And throughout the month, every mistake that showed up, and there were a lot of them, maybe you know what that's like in a congregation. Every mistake that showed up, we realized was just a part of our becoming. We realized was just a part of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist congregation, was to hold one another through those mistakes, through the errors, through the foibles, and that it led us to understand and to begin to realize how much we are one. One people. In all of our mistakes, in all of our successes, and our failures, and our victories. We're one. And that has moved us to act and to be different in the world. And so, as a sister congregation, we invite you to join us. Join us in making mistakes this year. Join us in celebrating them, not as the flaw of humankind, but rather our ability to grow, to become, to be. May it be so for all of us here in southern Arizona, in our congregations, and in our lives. Amen.
Amen.